Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare. Before we get to today's episode, I want to take this time to talk to you all about learning medical Spanish. Now, if you're a healthcare worker, you already know what an asset it can be to have Spanish in your toolbox. There's no need to call the glitchy translator line or pull out Google Translate on your phone or find that one colleague who is fluent. It makes for more comfortable and authentic encounters with your Spanish-speaking patients. Now, while I may be able to get by with just 4 years of Spanish in high school, I want to be able to truly connect with my Spanish-speaking patients, to let them know that I am able to communicate in their natural tongue. Now, this is where my friends at Common Ground International come in. They have been teaching medical Spanish to healthcare students and healthcare professionals since 2003. Their mission is to impact communities through language. Now, twice a year, Common Ground International offers a free 10-day masterclass that helps you take a medical history and perform a physical exam in Spanish. Not only that, but you're going to walk away with a customized learning plan to improve your medical Spanish over the next 6 months. And that's not all. After you complete the Medical Spanish Masterclass with Common Ground, you'll earn 4 free CME Category 1 credits. They only offer this masterclass twice a year, and the next one is coming up very soon on Friday, August 26th. So make sure to mark your calendars. If improving your medical Spanish is one of your goals, and it doesn't matter if you're a beginner, intermediate like me, or advanced, you need to join Common Ground Medical Spanish Masterclass. You can get all the infos of dates and scheduling on their website at www.commongroundinternational.com/masterclass. Hope to learn Spanish with you.
Our guest today is Dr. Brian Sutterer. Brian is a fellow sports medicine physician who acquired his medical degree from Indiana University. He continued his training at the Mayo Clinic, where he completed a residency in physical medicine and rehabilitation, followed by a sports medicine fellowship, also in Rochester, Minnesota. You might know Brian from his awesome YouTube channel, where he breaks down current sports medicine topics, specifically injuries in detail. Over the past 5 years, Brian has done a tremendous job cultivating a skill and creating a brand while providing exceptional value through his channel. So we wanted to bring Brian on to discuss a lot of things pertaining to the art of that practice, not the one in the clinics or the sidelines, rather the one he has done an amazing job at behind the camera. Some of the things we touch on in this episode include Brian's background and journey into medicine, specifically sports medicine, the genesis of his YouTube channel, which, as I said, is one of the best educational resources for learning all things sports medicine, the topic of new medicine in reference to the exponential rise of medical social media. We talk about playing the game but staying true to our core principles, Brian's learning process when he's curious about a topic, and we also discuss the business side with the revenue generation in particular, because I know that's a question that comes up early and often for healthcare providers when we're considering any opportunity cost of working on this craft, one that we're not trained for. There is a ton of amazing info packed in here, so let's get to it.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Medicine Redefined. We got a special guest with us, Dr. Brian Sutterer. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's great to talk with you guys. It's busy, wrapping up the end of fellowship year. Just we were talking offline before this. I've got like a week maybe left of being a fellow, and then it's finally done with training. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on here, right? And I think a lot of the audience, they may have heard your name, especially if they're sports fanatics and, they're watching their favorite player, might go down with a crazy injury, and they're going to wonder, how long is this player going to be out? What's going on? Or is my fantasy hopes down the drain? They're going to go on YouTube and they might find you, because that's what you do. You analyze injuries and you do it in such an awesome way. But let's start back, right, from your journey. So you went to med school, you went through PM&R just like Altamash and I, and then sports medicine fellowship, like you said. Take us back. How did it all start? What got you interested?
Man, so I had a very circuitous, non-traditional path to where I am now. I actually started college with no plan of becoming a doctor. My engineering is my background, so I studied mechanical engineering for my undergraduate degree. And it was maybe like halfway through where I sort of was like, gosh, I don't really enjoy the engineering jobs that I had done for internships. And we were required to take an anatomy and physiology course. And I basically took it as kind of like a science elective and thought I'll just kind of see how this is, and found it super interesting. And I kind of started to see the human body as a machine. Like it's a machine, just like a, a plane engine, a car engine, whatever. It's just, instead of it being something that doesn't, talk and walk and have feelings, for medicine, it was a living, breathing person that you could really make a difference for. But just after taking that class, I just really became interested in learning about the biomechanics, the physiology, and saw doctors as engineers, basically, who take care of people instead of taking care of things, these inanimate objects. And so I was initially planning on doing orthopedic surgery. There's actually a pretty high number of orthopedic surgeons who studied engineering as their background and started medical school like full bore. I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon. Had a bit of a detour. I did not get into medical school the first year that I applied. And so I ended up going back and doing a master's degree in biomedical engineering, got into medical school, realized I did not like orthopedic surgery. And then I remember I actually Googled like, what is the best kept secret in terms of medical fields? Because I was like, I didn't know what else to do. As soon as I realized I didn't want to be an orthopedic surgeon, I was like, I have no idea like what else I want to do in the medical field. But I figured there had to be something out there that was interesting and that I would enjoy. And I found some student doctor network forum that was about PM&R. And I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, it's a pretty good lifestyle. I can still do sports medicine. And so that's kind of how I ended up going down the PM&R route, and always knew I wanted to do sports medicine from the start. It was just a matter of kind of getting there through physical medicine and rehab. So very kind of non-traditional path, but it all worked out pretty well in hindsight.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. And so you knew sports kind of early on then, or was it because you didn't want to go the orthopedic route that you thought, okay, I had to do something with sports?
Yeah, I think even if I would have stayed and done orthopedic surgery, I would have probably wanted to do a sports fellowship. I mean, I played sports when I was in high school. I had tons of injuries that I had to have surgery for. And so I always just was really a big sports fan and knew I kind of wanted to be around that community, which is also kind of part of how I, eventually incorporated my YouTube side of things. So I knew I always wanted to do sports. It was just a matter of finding the pathway to get there of PM&R after thinking it was going to be orthopedics.
Right. Yeah. And for the listeners out there, I think a lot of people who are going to associate sports medicine with PM&R, but that's not always the case, right? You can go down the family medicine route. You can go down the emergency medicine route. So was it really just the specific training that you wanted that took you down physical medicine rehab rather than, let's say, family medicine?
Yeah, I knew I did not want to do primary care. Like, the last thing I wanted to do was, like, be doing diabetes checks and being a hospitalist and like delivering babies. Like, I wanted nothing to do with that whole world of medicine. I liked the sort of functional approach that PM&R took in terms of, we're going to look at the body as a whole. We're going to talk about function. It felt very in line with what I thought as an engineer. There's a lot of opportunities in PM&R to solve problems, to look at a complex issue and, have to critically think and develop a treatment strategy or develop some new adaptive device. And so I think the field's mentality fit really well with what I wanted to do. Going forward into sports medicine, I think a lot of the future of sports medicine, as you guys probably know, is very procedure heavy. It's a lot of kind of minimally invasive, kind of ultrasound guided procedures. It's orthobiologics. It's a lot of stuff that I think relies on having good like hand-eye coordination, good procedural skills. And I think of all the paths that you can go through to get to sports medicine, PM&R gives you the best set of procedural skills to get there. You're not going to get the primary care sports medicine stuff, obviously doing family med, but personally, I didn't want to focus on that as much as I wanted to be able to have those tools in my tool belt of doing the ultrasound guided interventions. And so PM&R felt like a good route for that too.
Man, hearing your story, it's close to my heart because I had very much the similar story, right? I was lucky enough that I think my first month in medical school, our dean at the time, or intern dean at the time, was a physiatrist and he's sports medicine trained. And so we had this like osteoblast, we called it, but it was like clubs to different specialties. And that's where I learned about it. And I was like, man, I can do non-surgical musculoskeletal medicine. And that's the path for me. When was it that you Googled that on SDN? Was it third year or third year med school?
It was,
or was it early on?
Let's see. So I remember, I want to say it was like early third year of medical school, because part of the whole not doing orthopedic surgery thing, I didn't do as well on step one as I thought I needed to do. And so it was like, boy, I didn't do as well in step one. I don't really like being in the OR. I've got to kind of figure something else out. And so it was kind of, I think, that I can't even remember like when you take step one anymore. I've intentionally just blocked that entirely out of my memory. But I think it was like early on in third year as we were getting ready to start clerkships. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I didn't have any like research in PM&R obviously, and didn't do any of my rotations until like the end of fourth year. So I kind of came into it later than, well, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, come into it kind of late in the game compared to other specialties.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about how it was the best kept secret. I tell medical students now, I'm like, it's no longer a secret. It's
Right,
the
it's not,
fastest
yeah.
growing specialty. And it's arguably one of the most competitive. Like the match rate is nearly 100%, if not 100% for the last
Yeah.
several years. And then the scores, like I remember our fourth year where I was heavily involved in the interview process. And the scores that were coming in, they were really, really, really good scores that you would think
Yeah.
traditionally in one of those, derms or ortho or neurosurgery specialty. So it is interesting how it's evolved, and it's going to continue to evolve for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, because the
you
breadth of
can't
the
treat
field.
it like a backup, right?
Mm-mm.
You know, I think a lot of people 10 years ago, they saw it as a backup, to orthopedics or to something else. And when people ask me, like, you can't treat it like a backup. You've got to give it the proper credit that it deserves as being a really competitive field for sure.
It's the opposite.
Absolutely.
It's the opposite now, right? You actually have to have a backup if you're applying PM&R. I think the match rate.
That's true,
Yeah,
right?
the match rate, I think,
Now
was
PM&R has to be your primary with a different
it
backup.
was like 30%, I think, this previous year. It was absolutely insane.
Wow.
So you mentioned you played a lot of sports, had a lot of injuries. Which sports did you play?
I played tennis primarily. My favorite sport was basketball. So I grew up in Indiana. I mean, back in Indiana, everybody's basketball is king. Friday nights, the gym, the movie Hoosiers. Basketball's where it's at. In Indiana, it's kind of funny. Now up here in Minnesota for residency and fellowship, I cover a lot of hockey. And before moving up here, I had never even been to a hockey game in my life. And now, like, I look back and hockey's been one of my favorite sports to cover and kind of learn about. And I finally, I think, understand the rules of hockey. But basketball was my favorite sport to play. I started my freshman year of high school playing basketball and was super scrawny kid. Like I could shoot the ball, but I was not an athlete by any stretch of the imagination. Like I wasn't fast. I couldn't jump. I couldn't play defense. I could shoot really well, but when you have like people guarding you, and you have to guard the other team, that doesn't work too well. So I stopped basketball after freshman year and then started playing tennis. And so tennis was my main sport throughout the rest of high school. I actually was hoping to play in college. I went to a Division III engineering school and was going to play tennis, but ended up having Tommy John surgery. So I somehow managed to tear my UCL, like kind of just insidiously over the course of tennis, like based on, I think, the way that I was serving. And so I had Tommy John surgery like early in my freshman year of college. And since then, like, don't really play much tennis anymore. At this point, I play like golf a lot. That's kind of, I'm like transitioning to that phase where like I'm old and don't want to play like contact explosive sports because I'm afraid I'm going to tear my Achilles or like blow out my ACL or something. So a little running, a little weightlifting, a little bit of golf. And that's kind of my happy place now.
It's funny you bring that up. Darsh is a tennis player too, and I'm picking up tennis. I bought myself a racket this year, bought myself some tennis shoes, and I haven't really.
It's really tough now because, and Darsh, you probably run into this as well. Like, I mean, I wasn't elite when I was in high school, but I mean, I was pretty good, and it's almost like hard to find people to play with now because like the people that want to go play just like dink the ball back and forth, and I'm like, I mean. It's not really fun for me to have to stoop down to like dink it back, and you guys want me to play hard, but it's not going to be fun for anybody.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And so it's hard to find people to play with, and so that's part of the reason why I kind of like stopped playing it so much.
Yeah. I think I got really fortunate. The gym that I go to, they have a tennis court and there's a coach. So like, he gives classes and there's various levels of people with expertise. Some are extremely, really well, good athletes, and others are kind of just beginners. So just kind of try to dive in there and just get a good workout. Yeah. The other thing, so you talked about injuries. Did you have any catastrophic injury other than the UCL? Was there like an ACL tear, a broken bone, something that was like, okay, this is a wrap?
Thankfully, no. I've never broken a bone in my life. Fun little fact. I had some ankle surgery. I had like some ankle impingement. And so I had to undergo surgery for some ankle impingement. I had a hernia like in high school that I had to have surgery for. So for the most part, I stayed pretty healthy. I since am now that person who like dislocates their shoulder when they just like fall on the ground. And so that's about the most recent like traumatic thing that's happened to me. But thankfully, I never had to experience like when my UCL was injured, it wasn't like I threw a pitch and like felt a pop and said, "Oh my gosh, my season's over." It was kind of more this progressive sort of thing. And so that's something we see that all the time, right? In sports, these like sudden big traumatic types of things. And it's hard because I've been on the side of recovering from a big surgery in terms of, not like, I remember with my UCL surgery, one of the hardest things was like going to the bathroom, right? Like you don't even think about like what you're going to do when you've got your arm like locked in this brace. And so you kind of experience that side of it. But thankfully I never had like the big sudden kind of traumatic thing to deal with.
Gotcha. Yeah. Speaking of injuries, and let's talk about your YouTube, right? Can you just take us through kind of the premise of it, and then the inception of it, kind of how you got started?
So it's pretty much it's educational based. I think my whole goal with the channel is I like teaching, and I think sports provide a great opportunity for people to become engaged and interested in learning who otherwise might not really have that same motivation to learn about stuff. And so if you can find specific examples that people can relate to, it makes learning more fun, it makes it more relevant, and I think people retain it better. And so, we've all been there, like watching on TV, watching a sporting event, and like something happens, and it's like a high ankle sprain, and the announcers are like, "Well, he's grabbing up high, so it must be one of those high ankle sprains," and you hear these things, you're just like, like it's like not at all what's going on. And so I saw it as just a nice opportunity initially to kind of merge two of my passions, one that I really like teaching, and another that I like being just really deeply involved in the sports world. I actually initially started the channel with more of just a medical sort of vlog perspective. And so there still, I think, are some PM&R videos out there on the channel just from way back in the day where I was just, day in the life of a PM&R resident, kind of talking about the specialty. And the plan was always to sort of try to incorporate the sports videos. And I thought that it would be a struggle to incorporate the sports videos. Like my fear was that I'd build up this audience from the medical following, and then they wouldn't be excited whenever I like put a sports video in their subscription feed. And I remember like the first video I did, it was about a basketball player who, tweet comes out on ESPN Sports Center, so-and-so diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome. And like you see all these comments and replies like, what the heck is this? People pasting Wikipedia links. And so I thought, this is it. Like, this is the perfect opportunity to see if this works. And the video did so well in the first 24 hours that I actually took it down because I was afraid of like, oh my gosh, did I say something? Like, am I going to get in trouble? Like at my residency program, like I was not at all expecting like 50,000 people to watch this in the span of like 24 hours. And then kind of like once the dust settled, I realized I hadn't said anything bad. Like it was okay. I realized like people like this, like people are actually interested in learning about these things and seeing pictures and seeing visuals and kind of incorporating what they're watching on TV. And it really surprised me at first, like how much people truly want to learn. I mean, you always think like, well, it's interesting to me, but surely other people don't give a darn about like high ankle sprains. But in reality, people do. People think the stuff is interesting. And so I just kind of totally changed directions and went with the sports videos. And I guess kind of the rest is history. People loved it and quickly got a pretty nice audience. And it's been great. It's been a really fun way to interact with the sports community, do something a little bit different, and also just kind of build up the skills of, creating it's a business basically at this point. And it's something I've had to learn how to do the audio, do the video, kind of be a, set designer and everything like that. And so it's helped build a lot of other just professional, personal skills along the way.
And that was what, 2017, 2018?
That was 2018, I think was when I very first began the channel. And it just like popped up in my memories feed today. I hit 100,000 subscribers 3 years ago. So I think I had, like the first year of my channel when it was just the medical videos, I had like 200 followers and it was probably all like my friends and family. And then like once I kind of started doing the sports videos, like in that first year grew quite a bit and then kind of steady since then. So yeah, I think it's been 4 years since I've been doing the sports content.
Yeah. And I mean, dude, it's really impressive. I mean, I was checking earlier today. I think you're about to hit that 600,000 very soon. I'm sure any day now. So that's quite a feat, right? And since then, I mean, people follow YouTube used to be a big thing. It still is a big thing for a lot of people, but now it's expanding to TikTok, social media. We have Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got all these other avenues where people can communicate. And it's kind of what I'm calling this thing as new medicine, right? I take that because we're coming off the finals, and I heard Draymond Green
New
clapping
media.
back at Stephen A. Yeah, talking about the new media, and so I'm calling this the new medicine. That's what we're talking about, right? We have podcast here. You've got your own podcast. People are on, again, all these different mediums communicating with people. And prior to that, actually, blogs you mentioned. So others that come to mind: White Coat Investor, Jim Dolly, right? Passive Income MD, and often these mediums can help physicians not only communicate, provide awesome information, but also generate revenue that sometimes far exceeds our primary jobs. I put that in quotes, where people think you got the stethoscope on, you got the white coat on, you're in the clinic, and it's not so much that anymore. And so, I kind of want to get your thoughts into what you think this quote unquote new medicine, this term that I've coined right now, it is, and what that looks like in the future for physicians, aspiring physicians who are maybe thinking that, hey, I'm going to practice medicine and I don't even know what that means anymore.
Yeah, boy, that's a fantastic question. It's really been an interesting space to observe and take part in. I personally I use Twitter. That's really my only other social media outlet. Like, I don't use Facebook. I have an Instagram account just because a lot of my video ideas and content come from people like tagging me and stuff and pointing out, hey, this thing happened. And so I use it more to get information. But like, I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Snapchat. I don't post on Instagram, but I sort of have observed like what's going on in that space enough. And it's been really interesting because I think there's almost like two different groups of people in that space. There's people who are, I think, trying to truly do like educational, professional advancement types of things, like this podcast. And then there's people who are like almost just doing it for like the entertainment and like the clout, for lack of a better word. I mean, there's so many people nowadays who are just like posting these, ridiculous like reaction videos on TikTok. And it's like, doctor reacts to this. And it's like a 5-second like clip of something that's like not even a thing. And like that has sort of gotten wrapped up in this world of like medical social media, when in my opinion, like it's like doesn't belong in like that same category. Like, and so it's been a really interesting space to observe, because you've got the people who are truly like on Twitter sharing journal articles and sharing cases and like building this professional presence. And then you've got this whole other world of like TikTokers and like dentists and chiropractors and people on TikTok that are just like sharing videos of pimples getting popped. And like, that's what's counting as like medical social media. So it's a weird space, and it's something that I'm curious to see how it evolves, because I see a lot of people feeling like they have to get into that like clickbaity, eye grabbing, boost your numbers world of like the TikTok side of things. And even now we're seeing it on YouTube, because YouTube is switching to like these YouTube shorts. And so there's this huge pressure now on YouTube that like, if you don't post these little 5-second, 10-second like reaction, clickbaity, shock factor types of things, you kind of get lost, and like the algorithm doesn't pick you up anymore. And so it's been a hard area to almost navigate, because I don't want to get involved in any of that side of things. But it's popular. Like, there's no doubt. I mean, people have built up millions of subscriber followings on both of these platforms by just kind of having that model. And I don't know how we really interpret that, how we, find that place in this world. And then you've got people like Dr. Glockenflecken who are putting out just absolutely hilarious, fantastic, like satirical comedy.
Yeah.
And that's in like a whole other camp of things. And so, I think it's something that we as physicians like have to embrace and realize that it's not like a one size fits all type of thing. Oftentimes people will come to me, like one of our departments for residency, they come to you and they're like, well, help us grow on social media. Like, we want to establish a social media presence, and you can't force it. I think a lot of people feel like, because this is the direction of medicine, like they have to force themselves to do all these things. Like, oh my gosh, I got to get a Twitter account and I've got to get a TikTok and I've got to do this. And they don't have the right motivation for it. And so they crash and burn and just get a bad impression of it. And so I think people realizing where they fit in to that whole social media world, even if it's just being a passive observer. I mean, one of the best things I think with Twitter is like, you don't have to tweet a darn thing. Like you can just follow 100 sports medicine doctors and see the cases they share, see the articles they tweet, and learn a ton. And you're still engaging in social media. You don't have to be, putting stuff out there. You can be consuming stuff. And so it's going to be really interesting over the next, few years, because you've got the push of like the medical field that realizes it needs to get involved in social media. But then you have sort of the younger up and coming generation who has grown up in social media and sees social media as like a fame building sort of place. and like how those two are going to come together, I think is going to be really interesting to see over like the next couple of years.
It's interesting that you bring that up, right? I think that to your point, part of the reason you started, part of the reason we started is to really provide value and provide education, right, for the listener. And at the same time, I think in order to do that and really make a difference, really make a dent, you do have to grow that following,
right? You have to play the game.
A footprint, right? You got to play the game. Exactly. And so, it's a challenge playing that balancing act, right? Because I'll be honest, one of the consistent feedbacks that we've gotten is that sometimes our episodes are just too long, right? We've had episodes that are 40 minutes and we've had episodes that are 2 hours. And some of those 2-hour behemoth ones is because we discuss complex topics. We're talking about nutrition. We're talking about, how to incorporate a healthy lifestyle. And these aren't things that we can communicate in 5 minutes. I mean, if we could, we'd be doing a disservice to it. Right. And so selfishly, what I'll ask you is like, how do you balance that, right? Like, how do you play the game yet still honor and educate appropriately?
It's really hard. And I've been tempted so many times to find some, like when do you guys remember when the crate challenge thing was going on around social media where people were like stacking the milk crates and like trying to walk to the top and then walk down? Like, it would have been so easy to just take one of those, like put it behind me on a green screen and just doctor reacts to, milk challenge fails. And it probably would have gotten like thousands of views and clicks, but it's like, that's not me. And so personally, I try to think about like my own reasons for doing it. I'll tell you the area though, where you have to play the game is, people always, my like professors give me a hard time for like my YouTube thumbnails, right? Like, I will totally admit that when I make a YouTube thumbnail, I'm trying to half the time find some stupid like shocked face that I'm making, or I'm trying to find like a thumbnail that is going to grab somebody's attention. If I make a very professional, very doctory thumbnail about some injury, nobody's going to click on it. But if I make a thumbnail that's like doctor reacts and it's my face and I'm like, making some weird motion, like people are going to click it. And that's the goal, is for people to click it so that they can see your information. And so I think there's things like that you have to do, right? There's ways you have to word things in your titles to grab people's attention. But I think as long as like the actual material itself is with good intention and with good purpose, to me, that makes it okay. But it's definitely a game you have to play. I mean, there's no doubt that I would have very different success, I think, on my channel if I had a different approach to thumbnails and video titles. And oftentimes I'll think, well, this is a really interesting topic to discuss, but there's not a good thumbnail out there. Like there's no picture, there's no injury event, there's no anything that like I can use to draw people in so that I can tell them about that topic. Like I almost feel like I have to trick people into learning. like here you are, here's this replay, this clip of this thing that happened. You're going to watch it because you're interested in that, but now I've got your attention so that I can teach you about it.
Right.
And it's kind of that, you're right, it is a game you have to play, and it's really easy to fall on one side or another. And it's hard. I've got the benefit of now I have a good enough size audience and following that I don't feel that pressure to grow anymore. And when I first started, nobody else was doing this. And so I was sort of the only person in the space that was doing this kind of content. And so I had that benefit as well. And it's hard now, right? There's so many people in the space that you have to, like, people feel this pressure to stand out by doing these very over the top, overblown productions to try to get people's attention.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we live in a world where you might have half a second to get someone's attention, draw them in so that you can provide that value. I mean, you're looking at TikTok, Instagram adopted what TikTok's doing, and now you have YouTube Shorts coming out. So, I mean, everything is moving towards a smaller and smaller attention span, right? And so, one of those things that scares me, again, if, like you said, is walking that fine line, right? And I think first movers advantage is actually a huge advantage, especially for you too, right? Because you had the following where you don't feel that pressure, and now people who are late to that game, they're going to feel that pressure to, oh man, I got to do something crazy, something that's not authentic. And again, I think authenticity will always win out, right? If you listen to Gary Vee, I mean, that's what he's talking about all the time. So going back from when you started to now, what are the things that you've learned along the way? How have you made your content better? Maybe your morals, in terms of looking at social media a little more defined. What are those things?
I've definitely become more set in kind of those morals, kind of my own personal professionalism with, things I'll talk about, things I won't talk about. For example, I don't talk about any fantasy sports content because I feel personally pretty strongly that it's very improper for medical providers to be giving gambling advice, basically. Yeah. Like, is what it comes down to, right? I mean, like, I personally feel like I have no legitimate right to sit there and say, well, this person is a health grade A and this person's a health grade C, and therefore you should not gamble $5,000 on this game because of this. Like to me, that just feels very wrong. And that's a personal opinion. I understand people who do that, and it's just a personal thing for me. And so I've become almost more set in that over the years because I just feel more like that's staying true to what my purpose is on doing this. Honestly, a lot of the stuff I've learned professionally is just the importance of knowing, like, everything you say can be used against you in this social media world, both good and bad. I mean, I've had some examples of times where I've kind of been a little bit more of a sports fan in stuff I've said, especially like on Twitter, or like in interviews, as opposed to being that professional doctor face. And people interpret what you say as a fan as you saying something as a physician. And that's not usually like the context in which you want things to be interpreted. And so I've learned that over the years, that truly, like, even this podcast, even if you guys are only having 100, 1,000, whatever it is, people that listen to it, theoretically, anything that we say, somebody could find and somebody could share to the world, and then the world sees it. And so going into all this stuff on social media, realizing that it doesn't matter how small you think your following might be, people can see it. And so I think having that notion beforehand really gives you that sense of responsibility of being professional and saying the right things and just conducting your business in a way that you would want your patients to know, or you'd want your parents to know. I've learned a ton about just like audio and video, which has honestly been one of my favorite things of doing all this, like camera setup and lighting. I've got probably like 7 or 8 lights in my office right now. That's my studio, and camera lenses and editing videos and sound quality and like making the process efficient. I mean, when I first started, it took me 4 or 5 hours to do a video, and now it's like 30 minutes to get a video out, just because I've like really honed down the speed of things. And so that's been a really nice benefit too, is just developing this whole other skill set beyond just kind of the product itself.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of just getting somebody on the hook, right? When you reel them in. I remember you mentioned on maybe another episode or some other show that you were on, that often you'll see people in the comments talking about, hey, I didn't really come here to learn. I just want to know what's going on. And you're like, yes, I've got somebody. And I found that to be really, really funny. And you talked about how you think that people are generally curious and they actually enjoy learning. So I want to talk a little bit about your learning process. I'd like to know what it is that feeds your curiosity, right? Outside of just sports medicine. We know you're passionate about that. We've talked a little bit about that. And then what's your process for learning something, like investigating, going deep into a topic? Maybe it could be sports medicine related when you got your boards coming up, but even outside that stuff.
So I think it all for me goes back to my engineering brain. Like, I still feel like I'm an engineer who became a doctor, rather than like I'm a doctor who used to be an engineer. And so going back to my whole childhood, I mean, I was the kid who was like taking apart the VCR. I was, making the guitar with the Kleenex box. I remember there was a TV show. You guys are kind of similar age. So you might remember it. There was a TV show on Nickelodeon called Figure It Out. And I don't know if you guys remember the show or not, but it was like this game show, and these people would come on who had like had these crazy weird inventions or done these things. And the panelist of like Keenan and Kel, like those types of people, had to guess like what the person had done. And I remember I was like 10 years old, and I drew up these plans for like a cat elevator that I was going to like install in my house to like let my cat go from like one floor to the other. And I was like 10 years old doing this. And so I've always just been very curious about like how things work and what is going on with something. And so I think that's what drives a lot of my just innate curiosity and like drive to learn, is just that sense of being curious, having a question that I just want to answer. And, I'm kind of a like brute force type of person when it comes to learning. I've never been the type to like take really tedious notes and like keep a calendar and like checklists. I kind of just start consuming things. And so, when I was trying to, for example, learn like how to light for a YouTube video, I just literally like go to Google, like how to light for a YouTube video. And then I just watch like every single video that I can find to just consume all of the information that's out there. I think one of sort of the fundamental principles of engineering is that the first step to solving any problem is you have to like collect the information and like figure out what And it's like medicine too, right? Like you have to get all the information. And so when I'm curious, when I want to learn something, my brain just goes to, okay, I've got to get all of the information. And oftentimes for me, that's honestly like YouTube videos when it comes to learning things outside of medicine. I went through a phase this year where I spent way too many hours trying to learn like some basic Python programming because I was trying to figure out like if I could like scrape some NBA statistics from like the NBA stats page to like incorporate into some of my videos. And so I probably spent like 30 hours like watching YouTube videos trying to figure out how to type like basic Python code. And then I realized it was not going to go anywhere productive. And it's like, okay, I need to like devote my brain power to something else. And so that's often the place I go is honestly YouTube, like when I'm trying to learn something outside of medicine. Otherwise, when I'm trying to like learn medical topics, probably like most of us do, I have an app that I use that I have like keywords kind of organized. It's called Read by QXMD. If anybody hasn't heard of it, I can't believe the app is free. It's absolutely fantastic. So that's how I kind of try to learn like medical stuff, is I'll just keywords, topics, and then just kind of see what's out there. I've never really thought too much about like my specific, style of learning. I just go to the internet and like type in what I'm curious about and consume everything that comes my way and try to filter it all out.
I love that though, right? Because I think as you're saying this, I can see like that's your strength. Your strength is understanding how you learn best, right? And going through that engineering mind of yours saying, what can I do to get that biggest return on investment, right? So even when you're thinking about your cat, you're really thinking, how do I get this cat from the first to the second floor, right? It might not have been about even building the thing. It was more about how do I focus on the cat? And then as a byproduct, I'm going to learn on my own. And it's just something that I was thinking about today in terms of, how do we become more competent, right? And I think no matter what our strengths are, the information is out there, especially in today's world, right? For me, I love to read. My thing is reading, but I'm thinking, how can I become a better reader? So I actually just bought a speed reading class, right? Because now it means I can double down on my strength and apply that knowledge. And then once you have that competency, you start to become confident. And when that confidence really hits is when you're going to start creating this value, right? And I think this whole thing becomes a cycle. So I just find it fascinating that you've really honed in kind of on your own process of learning.
Yeah, there's almost more of a skill these days of learning how to find information, like more than just knowing the information itself, like being able to find the information. And so like my wife will, like, I'll show her something I've done in my studio or like some little thing I've done on a video edit. And she's like, how in the world do you like figure this stuff out? It's like, I don't know. I just like find it. Like I just go out and like try to find that information, because you're right. Like everything we could possibly want to know exists. It's just a matter of finding our exact process and flow for how we're going to find where that information is, because it's somewhere. It might be in some random Reddit forum, or it might be someone's video with 5 views. It's out there somewhere.
Down the rabbit hole, absolutely.
Yeah, man, it's sifting through the noise to find the signal, right? And it's not
Yep.
dissimilar to finding good nutrition advice or finding
Mm-hmm.
good information about orthobiologics, right? Patients come to me and well, I'm like, hey, you can read about PRP, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll Google it. I'm like, well, it's you're going to find good information, bad
Yeah.
information. You just got to know where to look, and I think that's what makes us somewhat good at that because we do have that background knowledge, right? And but a lot of what both of you guys talked about is, what I'm hearing is at some level though, you just got to do the work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta do the work. There's no substitute for that work, and whatever it is that means to you. And obviously, for different tasks, a different amount is going to be required. And for many, the listeners will know, and a lot of folks in the medical field are listening, that there is just the demands of the work that's required to even get through, finish medical school, finish residency. It's high, right? I mean, so you went through you had 4 years of medical school, difficult specialty of your primary specialty, and now you're doing sports fellowship, which is just the busiest year, all the coverage and everything going on. Enter new baby into the mix. I'm wondering how it is that you maybe even create this balance, right?
Yeah.
We talk about the importance of that, right? From a mental health perspective, self-care is something that us physicians we're not known for taking care of ourselves, right? We do a good job taking care of patients, but again, starting with ourselves is super important. Like, especially when I think about what you do, like sometimes to me, it looks like you're on call, man. Like somebody goes down and,
Yeah.
and, you got that video by the end of the game. Like, how is it that you find, the ability to do that?
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because that honestly is how it feels sometimes. And I think, a sort of one transition point with all of it was once I got to the level where I was making money off of it, I saw, kind of like you mentioned at the beginning, like making more than we make as, residents and fellows. It's like, okay, this is like actually a sustainable like business. Like this is a thing that'll really like help supplement income as a resident fellow, et cetera, down the road. And so once I kind of saw that true kind of side product of it, I was a little bit more willing to almost treat it at times like it was a job and like I was on call. Because I also saw early on like that's how the success came, right? Like there's no doubt that early in my channel, the fact that I could get a video up so quickly is what brought me the success, because there's this short like 24-hour window where people are going to YouTube to search about something that just happened, and you want your video right there at the top. And so if you wait a day, if you wait till the next day, you're going to be so far down at the bottom of that list where people just aren't going to find it. And so I realized that if I wanted to build the success, as much as I enjoyed doing it, I kind of had no choice than to treat it like that. And then it kind of got to the point where it was almost like an internal competition to see like how quick I could make the process, right? Like, can I shave off 5 minutes? Can I shave off 15 minutes? Can I find a new way to edit? I totally changed how I edit my videos. I basically do like a screen recording session, like I'm live streaming, and I have all of my clips and anatomy that just like pop up with toggle switches, so that when I record, I just have to splice the clip. Like I don't have to overlay the images. I don't have to overlay the video footage. It's just like all recorded in one swoop. And that was like a big accomplishment because it shaved off like 20, 30 minutes of time. So I think, the things that you enjoy and are important to you, you're always going to find time for. And there are certainly times where it's like, there's something going on that I could make a video on, but like I need to take care of my newborn. And so I'm just going to go take care of my newborn and realize that like the family stuff still comes first. But there is like in anything that you are trying to build and develop, like you have to make some sacrifices. And whether it's going through your medical training or starting a YouTube channel where you're trying to grow an audience, you have to make those sacrifices at times. I mean, there were plenty of times where, I'd be on my way to bed at 10 o'clock at night and I'd get some tweet alert that, oh, something just happened. It's like, well, boy, I don't really know if I want to do this, but I know that like this is kind of what it takes to keep building this thing that I'm trying to build. And those instances are so few compared to the times where it's like truly fun and enjoyable, that you just kind of make those sacrifices the same way you have to make the sacrifices with anything else. And so I think taking as much pride and enjoyment in the process of what you're doing as much as like the result is helpful when you're trying to balance those things. But it's like anything, right? It's a balance of of what at what time you feel like is most important to you, and kind of making those sacrifices along the way.
So I'm glad you compared it almost like moonlighting, right? That's interesting that
Yeah.
you looked at it that way, and I think that makes sense to me. And so I'd like to take the next couple of minutes and talk a little bit about the business side of things, if you're game for this,
Yeah.
right? So I think that a lot of folks who might hear this, they say, okay, well, this is an opportunity, and this is something I'm passionate about, and I could potentially build. And if I'm generating revenue, fantastic, right? It kind of really helps because you talked about the time it takes, but it also takes a lot of money, right? So it's, both time investment and also financial investment. So what are some maybe strategies and tactics? You mentioned the clipping thing, other things that people could keep in the back of their mind to maybe boost revenue, or whatever project that they're starting. What are things that people could look for?
Specifically with like a YouTube channel.
It could, yeah. I mean, honestly, really anything. I mean, because you
Yeah.
got a podcast now. I mean, you're on Twitter, so you're on
Yeah.
several different mediums, right?
I think you have to realize that it's a process. And, if I use the comparison of a YouTube channel, people will look at like my setup and what I have and what I do and think, which honestly, my camera is not some expensive camera. Like my gear is not big, fancy, expensive gear, but they'll see a lot of other prominent YouTubers who have like $5,000 cameras and $1,000 microphones. And they think that that's what they need in order to produce content or to start their business, whatever it is. You think you need like everything that those people that you look up to for inspiration have. And you have to realize that those people that you're looking to, or those companies you're looking to for inspiration, did not start anywhere close to that level of resources and investment and, like equipment when they began their process. So the first year I was like recording on my cell phone. I had like a little crummy lapel microphone that I would use. And I had some super cheap box lights from Amazon that I had to like set up and take down in our kitchen every time I wanted to make a video. And then as you kind of gradually progress, you say, okay, here's an opportunity for improvement. I can upgrade my microphone and focus on making my sound quality better. And then after you do that, you say, okay, now I'm going to upgrade my lighting, and I'm going to read about some lighting tips, and I'm going to spend some time over the next few months focusing on my lighting. And so if you take kind of a stepwise approach with it, with like a podcast, there's some basic things you need, but eventually, okay, now we're going to work on our interview style, or we're going to work on our back and forth flow, taking those gradual steps to realize that you're not going to start at the level of what you aspire to be. You're going to start below that, just like everybody else. And it's going to be a gradual stepwise improvement, which I think is why you have to have pleasure in the process, right? Like you have to enjoy learning about making a podcast better. You have to enjoy learning about starting a microbrewery or like whatever it is, because it's going to be a struggle at times, and you're not going to start at the level that you want to eventually aspire to. And so you have to enjoy that process to get there.
Specifically speaking, so one of the things that obviously to generate revenue, you got to have sponsorships, affiliates, some version of that, right? And one of the ways to do it is obviously you grow a following and companies will reach out to you. But of course, you could reach out to products that you believe in, things that you endorse, right? We know that LMNT sponsors you. We're big fans of them for sure. What would be your recommendation in terms of that aspect of it? Was that something that you sought out, or were people looking towards you because you were creating this awesome content?
Yeah, it kind of was in both directions. So it's kind of funny because I think like the first time I had a video trending on YouTube, I suddenly like got all these emails from companies that are like, hey, we'd love to collaborate with you. And honestly, probably like 90% of them are like total scams. Like it's some random email that's full of terrible formatting from some company you've never heard of. And it's like, we have new product, like, please try our new product and support our product. And like, it's all very vague. And so at least 90% of it just gets deleted. Thankfully, I work with a management group, basically, that I was referred to by some other YouTube content creators. And basically they take a percentage of the brand deal fee, but they basically sat with me and said, okay, what are the things you do want to work with? What are the companies you don't want to work with? So for me, I was very clear, I don't want to work with like medical brace companies. I'm not going to work with like men's hair loss companies. I'm not going to do CBD products or like medical marijuana or whatever. And so then they sort of work with the companies to come to me with brand deals and say, hey, here's it's for X dollars. This is the requirement. Are you interested? Yes or no? And then if I say yes, they deal with all the contract negotiation stuff. And if I say no, then they're like, all right, great. And they move on from it. So for people who get to that level, I would 100% recommend finding one of these like talent brand management groups. And you can oftentimes just kind of Google search it and you'll find groups out there that are doing it. If you try and coordinate with other people in your industry, like for me, coordinating with other YouTube creators to say, hey, who are you working with? Who are some groups that you're familiar with that maybe I can reach out to? Taking advantage of that network is really big. And it's good. There you get way more requests, like I said, for things than you actually want to talk about. And so sometimes like the money's tempting, but it's like, I don't really think I should. I don't think I should be talking about this and supporting it, even though like the money would be really nice. And so you kind of, again, like going back to having a good sense of just your own professional standards and kind of morals with stuff to know like what you do and don't feel comfortable with.
How does someone know that they've gotten to that level where they're ready to outsource and get a management company?
That's a great question. I think if you're starting to get offers sent to you, then that's a sign that people are interested in sponsoring and being on your content. I think I'm trying to think how many. I probably had 100,000 subscribers when I started up with that company. And the rates for things like the level that I'm at right now with 600,000 subscribers, a 60-second brand deal is between like $2,000 and $4,000. And so then I can only imagine like if you're only pulling in like tens of thousands of like an audience, your brand deals might only be worth like a few $100. And so then you have to decide like, well, is that really worth the time it takes to film an ad and like communicate back and forth with the company? And so I think it depends too on just like what level of time you're willing to spend for the return that you're going to get. I mean, the people who have like 1 million subscribers on YouTube are probably getting like $10,000-$20,000 to do like one of these sponsored deals. And so then it's like clearly worth it. But if you're only getting like a few $100, then it's kind of like, well, do I really want to take 4 to 5 hours to film this ad for whatever company, or just kind of go about my way?
Yeah, absolutely. On the flip side of things, are you getting like recruited at all, let's say by like companies to be like, hey, Brian, we'd love to have you as an advisor here, or chief medical officer, or, even like job prospects? No. Okay.
Not at all. And it's kind of interesting because I would like to do that sort of thing, actually. Like ESPN, for example, has like their medical injury analyst. She does a great job, Stefania Bell. She's a physical therapist by training, and she does a lot of their like fantasy football talk shows and content. But really a lot of the other sports networks don't have anybody. And it honestly kind of blows my mind because I know people at those networks and like talk with them. And I'm always like, guys, I'm right here. Like, look at the clear interest in this. I want to expand my brand and my presence. I will come on your podcast for free. I will talk with your reporters about an article for free. Like, I'm right here. And rarely, like, there's been a couple of people that I've done some interviews with, but I really did think by now, like, it would be like, hey, do you want to come be our like, medical analyst for like whatever? And nothing. So I don't know if they just don't, I don't know what it is. I don't know if people just don't think there's like value or interest in it, or if people almost like being able to just sort of speculate themselves about that stuff, right? Because as soon as you like bring in a doctor who's like going to tell you the truth about something, you kind of lose the ability to sit there and like, well, this and that, and they're crazy. And that, you kind of lose that kind of provocative sports talk show ability when someone's like telling you like, no, this is the truth of the situation.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up. I think JJ Redick was interviewing Stephen A. Smith recently, and I was watching this clip on YouTube, and he was talking about how 10 years ago it was just SportsCenter, just clips over there running it, and then the debate format really started, I don't know, somewhere 2008, and him and Skip Bayless started that, and now you've got the Fox thing, and really everything is all debate format. And yeah, if a physician comes up, oh no, actually this is this sprain, it's going to take this long, that they
Yeah.
lose hours worth of content. So that wouldn't be too exciting for that.
Right. So yeah. So we'll. Who knows? I'm kind of at the point with it now where like I've accepted that may never happen, and so it's just my focus to kind of keep growing my stuff on my own. And if those other opportunities come up, great. But YouTube's nice because I can control it all, right? Like I can post whenever I want. I can say whatever I want. I don't have to have kind of that person looking over my shoulder.
Well, we're not going to give up hope, man. I mean, because I think what was keeping you from that was that CNBC and ABC hadn't listened to this show. So once they listen to it, you're definitely gonna.
That's right. Yeah, you guys have got a lot of pressure now. I think also too, it's hard. Like when you're, we talk about like the social media stuff, and when you're still like a trainee, it's tough, right? Because people don't. Every time I did like an interview for some article, I'd have to say like, well, like I'm a fellow, which technically means like you can't really refer to me as a sports medicine doctor because people who read your article are going to think that means that I've been like practicing and I'm licensed and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean you're a fellow? Like, what is that? And so I'm hoping too that now, like once I'm done and I can say like, yep, I am a sports medicine physician. They're like, okay, cool. Like you kind of have a little bit more credibility.
So close to that finish line, man. We could taste it. Just a week left, right?
Like 8 days.
So we talked a lot about your YouTube channel and stuff, but you recently started a podcast too. So, I got to ask why, right? Has it been 2-3 months?
Yeah.
In Street Clothes?
We've done, right? I think 14 episodes. So huge credit, Jeff Stotts. He is an athletic trainer who still works as an athletic trainer at a high school. But started working on this NBA injury database probably 10 or so years ago, just huge basketball fan. And to date has probably the most comprehensive just injury database that I know of. And he actually started a company with another physician, Robbie Sika, where they provide like consulting services to NBA teams about like when players get injured and like draft pick review and all kinds of really cool stuff. And Jeff and I had always kind of been on the same page in terms of like our goal is education. We're not here to talk about fantasy sports. We're here to just like teach people and provide some context. And, we said earlier how like there's this pressure to get involved with like TikTok and Instagram and this and that. And I kind of felt a little bit of a pressure to start a podcast, to be totally honest. I think some of it was I wanted to get some reps in the sense of, talking in YouTube format is very different when I can speak for 10 minutes into the camera and then clip together 5 minutes of a video. A podcast, it's a little bit more, pressure in the sense that you can't like go back on what you said. It's just a different way of communicating. And as much as I want to be on other people's podcasts to kind of, keep spreading that awareness, I just felt like I needed some more experience myself. And so it's been a nice challenge. I always like having something that I'm like working on, that I'm pushing myself with, that's a new challenge. And so it's been a great challenge. Like getting to know Jeff has been fantastic. And so it's just been a new experience. I mean, I don't see it as like, we're going to grow this thing like I grew my YouTube channel. I kind of see it as like a side project that's a fun way to, get to know somebody really well, something that doesn't really exist in the podcast space either, and is helping to develop another skill, right? Because it's another skill to edit the audio and talk on a podcast for an hour or whatever the case may be. So it's been a fun challenge where I think 14 episodes in, and who knows where it's going to go. But it's been great to kind of stress yourself and learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about creating value for others, but then also for yourselves, right? With this new project, you also mentioned getting reps in, right? So I know a lot of people want to be in your shoes and our shoes, right? Doing podcasts, doing YouTube, getting their face on TikTok. But one of the things that holds them back is this self-consciousness, right? Of, I can't stand to see myself, or what if I mess up, or I'm not the best public speaker. How do you recommend people start and get those reps in and then eventually get over that hump?
If you're doing a video format, the best thing that I can recommend doing is getting Snapchat and just sending Snapchat stories to like a friend or significant other all day, because it'll force you to just like get used to seeing your face on a screen. And it's very low risk, right? They're not going to judge you. Like nobody's going to put it out on the internet for everybody to see, but it kind of gets you used to seeing your face in front of a camera. I mean, like there were so many days when I first started all this that I would like try to record a video and then I'd like watch it back and I'm like, oh my gosh, does my voice seriously sound like that? And like, is that really what my face looks like? Like it's hard. Like I think everybody experiences it. I mean, you guys probably felt the same way. Like when you
Yeah.
first started doing your podcast, you listen back and you're like, wait, that's what like I sound like to everybody. And then you get far enough into it that it's just like second nature,
Yeah.
and it's not a big deal anymore. And so I would tell people, have the confidence that you'll get over that. Like eventually, if you do it enough, you won't even think twice about like seeing yourself on camera, hearing what you sound like in a pair of headphones. But you just have to get the reps. Like there's no way around it. It's never going to become more comfortable and easy than just progressively exposing yourself to it and getting over it. They're like, a switch is not going to flip one day where you're like, all right, I'm comfortable with this. You've got to just gradually expose yourself to it more and more and more. And the nice thing is when you first start, nobody's really like seeing it or listening to it. I mean, everybody starts out small. And so it's like, okay, maybe 20 people are going to hear your funny sounding voice or see your, like in the beginning, I got so many comments about my appearance. Like I have a dimple in my chin and people would be like, oh, this is really interesting, but I can't stop looking at the butt chin that you have. And I would like look in the mirror and be like, oh my gosh, they're right. Like I do.
Yeah.
And then I got super self-conscious about it. And then like a few months goes by and you're like, okay, that's ridiculous. Like nobody cares. You kind of get over it. And so again, it's that like embrace the process, like know that it's going to be awkward. There's no getting around that it's going to be awkward, but it's never going to not be awkward to start. And so if you want to get there, you just have to accept it and start. I mean, some of the best advice I got in life period was from an orthopedic surgeon after I found out I was not going to get into medical school the first year. And the med school told me, well, we don't believe that you can excel at like graduate level science courses because your engineering GPA was kind of low and like, And they told me to go back to graduate school. Well, I had been working at an engineering job like after college, and like the thought of going back to graduate school for a year and like leaving a nice paying job and my friends was sounded terrible. But I met with this orthopedic surgeon and he basically looked at me and he's like, what do you need to do today to get to where you want to be in 20 years? And like, it sounds so simple, but it was so true. Like the thing that I needed to do that day was enroll in a graduate program to get to where I wanted to be in 20 years of being a doctor. And it was that simple. And it's the same with creating all these businesses, the social media stuff. Like if you say, okay, in 5 years, I want to have X number of followers, or I want to have X revenue on a business, or I want to be the head team physician for the St. Louis Cardinals. What do you need to do today to get to that spot in 20 years? And oftentimes with the social media stuff, that means turning on the camera, turning on the microphone, hitting record, and just starting, because it's never going to get easier. And all you're doing is losing out on valuable time.
Yeah, it's such sound advice. I mean, I look at myself now and I'm like, I'm 30. I look back and I'm like, man, if I knew the stuff I did now at 20, or even if I just enacted those dreams at the age of 20, right, with the same mentality, the same grind, quote unquote, man, I would be accomplishing those things earlier. And that's fine because I'm embracing the process, but don't let that be another regret, as you look 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So I know we're coming up on time. So a last couple of questions here is, what is next for you? Where do you see yourself, after fellowship? What are kind of the next steps?
I'm still looking for a job. So if any potential employers out there are listening, no, I'm in the process of interviewing for a couple of jobs, and hopefully I'll find out here in the next month or two about where we're going to end up. For now, man, I'm going to get boards out of the way, enjoy some time at home with our newborn son and my wife, and just kind of chilling for a little while. I want to still continue to practice like academic medicine, I think, whether that's truly in like a big academic setting where I'm surrounded by like residents and fellows, or even just at a place where I can just teach like medical students and interact with like high school pre-meds. I want to be somewhere where I can practice sports medicine, but still be able to teach people. Because I've realized like that's truly my passion, and that's truly kind of like what I want to do with my education and beyond just taking care of patients. And so who knows where that's going to end up being. I don't really have the aspirations of being like a big head team doctor. Like, most people message me and they're like, how do I become the team doctor for the Yankees? And I'm like, all right, like slow down. There's about like 20 steps of things that you need to think about. So I don't really have big goals like that. I think it's take great care of patients, have opportunities to teach people and continue to educate, and just keep grinding away at the media stuff and see what other doors open themselves up as opportunities to step through.
Awesome, man. Well, before I ask the last question, man, I just want to say thank you so much for giving your time to come in here and talking to Altamash and I. As me and Altamash are doing this podcast, there's just so much that at this moment I can see from Altamash's face that we're just like learning from you and slowly putting it in our heads, saying, "Oh, okay, well, this is what we could do. This is what we could do." So definitely appreciate your input. I think a lot of our listeners are definitely gonna find value, and learn from you as a teacher. So we'll definitely link your YouTube
Thanks.
as well on there for people to check out. But our last question here is, how do we put the health back in healthcare?
How do we put the health back in healthcare? Man, the first thing I thought about was diet and exercise. And I think a lot of that comes down to like education for people to understand the value of diet and exercise. I mean, we've got all of these new things like stem cells and PRP and fancy surgeries and this and that. But like so many things in medicine and healthcare could just be better with like basic health, which is like diet and exercise, right? And so I feel like if we can get people at a younger age, like truly back to understanding the importance of like diet and exercise, that's going to be the biggest thing we can do to make people healthy. Beyond that, I mean, we've got to like stick to our roots. I've got a sports medicine consultant here who doesn't do like ultrasound stuff. He doesn't do like orthobiologics. He's just like the foundations of sports medicine, and not forgetting those roots of kind of where we came from amongst all this new technology and changing directions of the field. Like at the end of the day, people are still people, and people's physiology and the problems that we have really aren't any different now than they were 200 years ago. It's just now that we have the benefit of everything else to kind of help with it. So I think the best we can remember those roots amongst all the stuff that we're now being forced to deal with.
Love it.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
If you're a sports fan and follow any team closely, then you probably care about injuries and return to play. And if that's the case, then I'm willing to bet you would get a ton from following Brian. I know I have. And if you're like me and you'd like to get a lot of information through podcasts, then there's something for you as well. Brian also has a new podcast called In Street Clothes, which provides a similar mission to his channel, albeit with a partner. I encourage you guys to give him a follow. Now, before signing off, please remember that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. However, if you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this as well. Until next time, thank you for listening.